Hey community, in today's episode, Jenni Mcgrew, the founder of Worship Leaders Collective, joins Matt McCoy to talk about how to lead and pour into your worship volunteers well. Whether you have volunteers on your team or whether you are a worship volunteer yourself, we hope this interview is helpful. Enjoy.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's Loop Live. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm your host. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com and the Loop Live show, where today I'm going to be interviewing my good friend, Jenni Mcgrew. She's the founder, the leader of Worship Leaders Collective, which is a massive community that's on Facebook and Instagram, and tons of worship leaders are in that group, and they all just talk everything worship. And if you're a worship leader, you need to for sure be inside of that group and be just encouraged by what's happening in that group. So today, I'm going to be talking with Jenni about how to lead volunteers and how to grow your volunteer base at your church and in your worship ministry. I know that finding volunteers, keeping volunteers, dealing with difficult volunteers can be a challenge. That's a part of the worship leading job that I know that some people really don't like. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about that and get real. And I'm looking forward to talk to Jenni about it and get some ideas and fresh ways to do that. So if you guys are watching this, write down in the comments at any time. If you have any questions, write down in the comments your questions, and we might take a few of those live and answer them. So make sure you do that. Without further ado, here is Jenni Mcgrew. Jenni.
Hey.
Welcome to the Loop Live show. So glad you're here.
Good to be here, friend. So good to see you. We've seen a lot of each other lately with Worship Innovators and stuff.
We have. We've done ton of conversations with each other. We did the Worship Innovators conference together. It's been a fun couple of months. And
totally.
It's really been a joy, too, just personally getting to know you better over the past year or so. We didn't really talk much before that, but I think in the past year, we've had a lot of phone conversations and Zoom meetings, and I've just really enjoyed getting to know you and your just authentic heart and passion for worship leaders. And most importantly, your care for the things that really matter, which is the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. It's not really about the performance and the celebrity culture and status or money and all that, like all these kinds of things that get twisted into worship world sometimes. And it's a challenge. It's like a weird tension that I think a lot of people feel with. And I just know that you have this like heart for like the worship leader heart. Like, how do we take care of that? How do we just keep that healthy and in a good place? And so I love what you're doing with Worship Leaders Collective. Thanks for joining us today.
100%. Well, it's good to be here, and we love to be part of what you guys are doing, and not just being for you guys, because we are for you, but just to be able to walk, with you guys. And, so many of us are able to walk together this season. And I just, it's one of the beautiful things I think that's come out of this pandemic. I think a lot more of us are seeing the value in walking together. So it's great to be here. Can't wait to have some good conversations. Last week we talked, you were on our podcast, and that'll be coming out soon. And I was actually telling my husband, I said, I think I could just sit and talk for hours with Matt. I said, I would actually enjoy some more just like, just sitting at a table and just hearing what's in your heart and just hearing you share. So this is going to be fun. So
hopefully we'll get to do that in person again one of these days.
We will.
Today we're going to be talking about worship volunteers, which is a topic that I'm sure comes up in the Worship Leaders Collective a lot, because I think this is a point of tension for a lot of worship leaders. It can be hard to lead people, and a lot of times people are very trained musically, like they know how to sing great, they know how to play their instruments great, they know how to put a set list together. But then once it comes to like these tensions of like, volunteers that are being difficult and aren't showing up and aren't practicing, or even getting volunteers in the first place, it can be a really major learning curve for people, and
huge.
A frustration. And it can lead to burnout if it's not handled well. It can lead to getting fired if it's not handled well. I mean, it's difficult, but it's a huge part of obviously what we do. And so I guess my first question for you is, how does a worship leader, first of all, even foster a community and culture of people wanting to volunteer and be a part? Because it's a challenge even to get people in the door.
Right. How do they foster? Well, I'd written some notes here, so I just want to read what I wrote here, and then we'll get into some deeper conversation.
Yeah.
But how can a worship pastor foster a culture that encourages people to volunteer? Well, I was thinking about that. It was actually something that Paul Balash and I were just talking about a few weeks ago, just on an Instagram chat back and forth. But we were talking about how I'll say, like, we teach what we know, but we impart who we are. And he says something similar. Well, we teach what we know, but we minister who we are. And I was thinking about this question that you guys had sent me, and I was thinking, we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. 100%, we will always reproduce who we are. So I think for myself, and even my husband and I, we co-pastor a church together, and just even past worship teams that that I've had the honor and privilege to lead is you can't. You got to serve. So if you want to have volunteers on your worship team, then you gotta serve with all your heart. You got to serve with all your soul. You got to serve with all your might, and not serving in your church, but also being willing to serve them. We look at Jesus, our greatest example. Our model. He didn't come to be served. The Bible says that, but he came to serve and to give his life. His life as a ransom for many. That's what the Bible says, and we can see that just with the life of Jesus Christ. So how do we foster a culture that encourages people to volunteer? Be the volunteer. Serve, show up, do all the things. And, I think practically we can create a positive and we can create an uplifting environment. I just think that, positive people, positive environments are attractive. People are drawn to that. And, when we create a culture of hope, when we create a culture of love, when we create a culture of encouragement, joy, all those things are super contagious, especially post-pandemic, because we're in such people are in such a love deficit. People are in such a joy deficit. People are in such a hope deficit. For all that people that are watching right now, I think these are some super simple and practical ways that people will just be, I want to be part of that. I want to be around someone like that because I actually need that. Because, we think deeper, these are the fruits of the Spirit. And we are spirit. We were talking about that a little bit last week, you and I, about the unseen, but we are spirit. So our spirits are naturally going to be attracted to the things of the Spirit. So, and also realizing that as we're on-ramping, as we're unloading, people into our team, we can accept anyone and everyone. We can do that. We've all done it. I'm sure you've done it. We've also reaped the fruit of doing that too, you know? But I would caution people not to do things too quickly, especially, again, I think I know a lot of teams are in a deficit, people have just kind of scattered, now with the pandemic, people haven't been able to travel. So people are vacationing like crazy, and of course, people just naturally want to do that. But I would just caution people is don't worry about having the biggest team. Don't worry about getting, the farthest, the fastest, and just really, what I actually just had this conversation with a girl last week because we're just getting ready for the fall again. And we're talking about worship leading. And I actually said this question. I said, would you die? And this is a really strong thing to say, but I looked her in the face. I said, would you die if you couldn't lead worship? Would you die? And, and that's kind of, take that with a grain of salt, And I was really pressing her hard, and she's like, yeah, like, would it kill you, and not like literally, but, figuratively. And she said, it would, and I said, well, that's great. I really wanted to hear that. I needed to hear that because calling begets calling, and we're not just trying to fill up space in our worship teams, but we really want a worship team that are all called because, whether you're the guitar player, whether you're the drummer, whether you're the pro presenter person, we are really all worship leaders in our own right. So how do we help, foster a culture that encourages people to volunteer, do all the things that I just said. I'm sure you've probably got better ideas than what I just said, but, calling begets calling, and people are going to be attracted to that. And it's also going to create a culture that might not be quick growth, but it will be sustainable,
That's so good. I love what you said too about creating an atmosphere of joy and positivity. People are drawn to that. And I will say that I think that things immediately start to go south when worship leaders start to care about the music more than the people. the people in your band. And if I'm being completely transparent with you, when I look back at my younger years of worship leading, I look back and I like kind of cringe a little bit because I'm like, man, I remember moments when I definitely cared way more about the music and how well we sounded and how, hey, did you play that part right? And I would like almost like even like challenge the drummer, like in I think not a healthy way, to be like, you didn't play that part exactly like the album, the recording, and like, come on. And I like was caring more about the music than I was the people, and I know that must have rubbed off on people. Like people knew that for sure, and that did not make people feel good, and it probably didn't might make them want to keep playing and serving, and that is that's a failure on my part as a leader.
Totally. I think too, like as you're just saying that, I think we could open up the conversation a little bit wider too, is that people are looking to be part of a family right now. And I think, people are looking to be part of they don't have a family, or they've been so disconnected, they're longing for family. And as we purpose to just create or continue to create that family culture, that people will want to be part of that. We were just with Wilco, we just had Andy Razier on this morning, and he was actually talking about humility. And I know we're not talking about that right now, but he said, I'd rather have an ounce of humility from someone than all the talent, and, so that when we're onboarding people, or whatever your process is, don't just be so quick to look for the talent, look for the heart of the servant, look for the joy, look for the person that wants to connect and really be part of a team. And because they're going to be more willing to be a team player, and they're going to help create that culture of family, that culture of team, that culture of unity, that you might initially have to create that culture yourself and start it. But once it begins to take shape and form, that culture, will begin to gain momentum, and you'll find that volunteers will begin to automatically begin to be attracted, and it won't be so much work. It'll be in momentum at that point.
It'll be enjoyable. It'll be enjoyable for everybody.
Totally. Yeah. Sometimes the process is work at first. That's just part of the process. But as I believe, as we just purpose to keep sowing and investing into the right things, that we'll reap the right things, and we'll reap with joy.
And I think that goes into my second question, and we may have already kind of answered it, is that, the volunteers that you do have, the people in your team that you do have, how do you really go above and beyond to make them feel valued? And I think really what we were just talking about is the main answer there. Right. Is relationship, vulnerability, positivity, encouraging them, right? Leading them as a pastor, as a fellow believer. Right. Would there be anything else you could add on to that you think?
We have something that we say to all of our volunteers. I'll say this to our worship team too, is that we care more about how you're doing than what you can do for us. And I think that's just so important, because that just plays along into what you were saying about relationship, is that, people need to be seen. People need to see that they have value. People need to see that they matter. We need to see that too, and sure, we get that from the Lord. You and I are spiritually mature enough, we get that from the Lord each and every day, but we also get it in the form of one another. And I just think that's so vital, just to always put the relationship before anything, and just, sit down and talk to them, say, hey, how are you doing? And not like just blowing past, hey, how are you doing? But just really, when you have those moments with them, just take the time, look them straight in the eye, total undivided focus, so that they really see that you see them and that they matter. And that'll also help foster the right culture in your worship team, because that will begin to multiply in the team.
It's such a challenging thing, I think, for a lot of worship leaders, because a lot of times, it's a job, like they're at their job. When you're leading worship, if you're a full-time worship leader, you are working, basically. Like Sunday morning, you're on shift. And it's almost like if you were working at a restaurant or something, and your parents come in and they want to chit-chat and talk. It's like, hey, mom and dad, I got to work. I can't be talking right now. So worship leaders kind of have to juggle this of it can be hard to really be intentional on a Sunday morning to talk to your team, and because you're running around trying to make sure, hey, are the lyrics right, are the lighting right, rehearsal, sound check, thinking about a lot of things. And so how do you juggle all those balls at once?
Totally. And I think that's, just even the little things that we can do is, obviously you have a team huddle before, whether you do that with your whole church team. We used to do that. Or then, we do it with like our whole team, before church, and we pray and we just go over the service. But then we also do it with our, individual team, and we'll go over things. Hey, does anybody need prayer today? And then after we get off the stage, or, whatever people's platform looks like, we'll just have a debrief time, and it's not critical time. This isn't the time to say this sucks, or I hate you, how it can just go really bad, really fast. But it's a time where we can just say, okay, let's celebrate the wins right now. The other stuff can be talked about later. But, that's a real way that you can help foster that as well. Easy stuff, that. Because when on set, let's be real, when when stuff's happening and, people have even said to me when I'm in the middle of stuff, wow, you're really intense. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm kind of cooking the meal right now and I'm serving the table. This isn't really the time to be like, hey, I got a joke for you. It's just that, because we're trying to be faithful in that moment to serve the Lord. So it's knowing, it's teaching our team to honor the moment, to know what each moment is for. So, when it's all hands on deck, it's like, okay, this moment is to serve the Lord. We're all going to work together. We see each other, we love each other, but this isn't the time maybe for all those things. We're going to have that time before and we're going to have that time after. Now, if you're seriously having a meltdown and you're having a breakdown, okay, for sure, I'm here for you. I don't know how we're going to deal with it, but I'm always here for you. We're going to figure it out, But I think that bookend thing that we can do, I think is super valuable. And, it just makes sense. It's just easy.
Yeah. One of the easiest times, I think, on a Sunday morning to do that is right after worship. So, because, right leading up to the actual worship set, there's a lot going on. People are running around. You've got to get things ready, get going. But then right after worship, right, you all walk off stage. Sometimes you walk back into a green room or something. And instead of letting everybody disperse at that point and getting coffee in the lobby or whatever, what about this? What if, and I actually remember doing this one time at a past church I was at. You know how you pray before a worship set? Mm-hmm. What we did is after the worship set, we'd all gather in the green room. You'd walk right into it and we'd do a prayer huddle and just thank God for what just happened. So instead of the prayer of hey, God, help this worship set go well, it was God, thank you so much for just such an awesome time of worship and what you did this morning. And then right then maybe take 5 minutes to talk about, hey, what did you guys think? How are you guys doing? And
totally. It puts all the focus back on the Lord and it gives all the praise to Him. And also in those little things that might be bothering us, even that simple act of just giving it all to Him can sometimes just release the grace of God into our own lives. So the little things that we don't really even need to talk about that don't matter, they just kind of get washed away just in that moment of prayer in the presence of the Lord. So I love that, Matt. That's so good.
So how do we help our volunteers? I don't even know if the word volunteers is even right. I always, every time I say volunteer, I'm
struggle with
this is such a weird word.
I know.
How do we help our team members, our worship comrades? How do you, as the leader, how do you help everybody really grow as worship leaders?
Yeah. How do you help them grow as worship leaders? Well, again, we were talking about this morning, is it's about being a worshiper. It's actually not really, it is, but it isn't, on a pie chart. If we were to do a pie chart of worship leading, I always tell people I think this much would be worship leading and the rest is just worshiper, And I think it's just really putting the focus back on, a worship leading, how many times we do it, however we do it is really so small, really, in comparison of our week, of our everyday act of worship. We see that in Romans 12 so well, just take your everyday ordinary life, place it before God as an offering, and then the end, in different translations, it says this is the least that we can do, for everything that God did for us. So, I just think it's always making sure that we are putting Jesus Christ first and foremost before everything, the set list needs to get practiced. The new songs need to be learned. I'm not saying those things don't matter, but to me, they're back here. They are important. I want it excellent. I want it tight. I want it right, but I want to see how are you doing in your relationship with God? How are you growing in your relationship with God? And just simple things like asking our team in those moments when we connect with them or texting them, or having a team group text hey, what are you guys reading in your Bible today? Or what are you guys hearing, from God today? And I might answer that a little bit later in another question. but it's just constantly talking about the Lord, because I find so often, and maybe you found this too, it's like Jesus becomes this appendage. It's like he's like over here, it's like the doing is all like the everything, and then it's like, oh right, Jesus, oh right, but Jesus, but like for me, and I want to talk about Jesus 99.9% of the time, and I think, and I hope that inspires other people to be like, oh right, I'm a child of God, oh right, I'm spirit, oh right, I'm actually not from here, and just all these things as we individually, as worship pastors, as leaders, because people have different roles and positions in the team. But it's just like the Apostle Paul said it so well, follow me as I follow Christ, and I don't want to digress too far from your question.
It's almost like helping your volunteers grow more as followers of Christ than it is helping them grow as worship leaders, because it'll come. If they're growing as followers of Christ, they're going to become better worship leaders and worshipers.
Totally. And I love that you just said that, because it was something the Lord said to me actually 2 weeks ago. And, I love studying about leadership. I love reading leadership. I listen to every John Maxwell, leadership podcast. But Jake and I, my husband, we were just at a retreat in Alberta with some friends a couple of weeks ago. And someone was talking, and I don't know, I just went to like La La Land with the Lord, because the Lord just began to talk to me. And I just said, Lord, what do you want me to learn in this season? What do you want me to learn? He said, I want you to become a really good follower of me. And it was like, it wasn't like profound. It wasn't like the Lord had never told anybody that before, and that might just sound overly simple to you. But I think sometimes I focus so like, I got to be a good leader, and I've got to do this, and I've got to do that. And the Lord just kind of like, just that, those holy reset moments with the Lord. He said, Jenny, like just so still, this is what I want you to focus on this season. I want you to get really good at following me. And it just blessed me so much, because it was like, like it just felt so good. And, I hope that as I become, in Jesus' name, or just by the grace of God, a better follower of Jesus Christ, and that's a broad conversation that we're not going to talk about right now. That, you can only give away we can't give away what we don't have, and that, even as you're leading your team, or, whether it's at Loop, or, whether it's worship innovators, or whether it's, even in your own church, and, that as they see us following the Lord, that they too will want to follow the Lord, And I have other people in my life that, like my father-in-law is one of them, I just love how he follows the Lord, and that inspires me to want to be more like Jesus.
Wow. Yeah, it is. It's more about your character than it is what you're able to do as far as your actions. Like, oh, I'm a good guitar player, I'm a good worship leader. But who are you, like, as a person, like, in the heart? Like, do you love God?
How's your heart? My father-in-law asked me that my whole life. Number one question. I just always laugh. He'll even just text me, how's your heart?
Yeah.
How's your heart? And I want to see young people, I'm just, we're just so passionate over here about just seeing this next generation be able to go the distance, no spiritual abortions. I've seen a lot of spiritual abortions.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I just cut you off.
No, you go ahead. You said.
No, I was just saying, maybe that would be a good question to ask your volunteers, your team members. Like, how's your heart? Like, how are you doing? How are you doing in your relationship with God? And I think that's really good. Right. And
in the right, with the right heart, because I think, I came from a culture years ago where it was like, you pray at this time, you spend, you can only, and they didn't say this, but I kind of felt this way, so this isn't throwing any shade at all, but, you only pray between 4 and 6 a.m. in the morning. That's like the most spiritual time. And like 1 hour, you have to spend 1 hour with the Lord, and you got to read a proverb, you've got to read a Psalm. And then, then you got to read like 4, but I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there, and, I think that we really have to be careful with how we say it too, because we're not trying to get people to perform, we're not trying to, we want to teach our worship teams to live after the Spirit, and not to be afraid of us saying, hey, how's your heart? Jenny's going to ask me how my heart is, and I don't know what I'm going to say. And here's my here's my planned response, My hope, and I say this for my kids, and, our kids are, 19 and 22 now. I can hardly believe it. But my hope as a parent is that when the kids leave the house, that we didn't just teach them what to believe or what to think, but how to believe and how to think and who to believe in, that they just wanted to, and I think of that like as a leader, as a pastor, as a worship pastor, as a worship leader, that we, am I really truly leading my team to walk after the Spirit, not just to depend on me, but am I teaching them to walk after the Spirit and rely on the Spirit? This is a deep conversation, Matt. I wasn't expecting it to go like this.
No, that's so good. That's so good. Well, and it's also like, when you're leading a team, it's important to explain the why behind why you're doing something, not just the directives of what you want done, but like why? Like what's the vision behind it? Mm-hmm. And that's good. That was actually a really good word for me, just as I'm raising my 2.5-year-old. Because
She's
I don't
cute.
want her to grow up just thinking like I do this because I was told that's what we do. Mm-hmm. Like
totally.
I want there to be a desire out of her heart to do it.
Totally. Sorry, we have a bit of a delay here. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I had told, I don't know who I said the other day. I said, you know what? It's beautiful, and don't want to cry while I say this, because, you just get so passionate about parenting. You understand now. You're married, and, you have a little one, and I think do you have another one on the way?
Another one coming in like 2 weeks.
Yeah, I thought so. And, I was just like, if I died tomorrow, that sounds heavy. Don't let that be heavy. If I died tomorrow, I know that my kids would serve the Lord.
Yeah.
And, here we go. That's the win.
Yeah.
That's the win. That's the goal. And we're not talking about this, but I am going to say this. Parents, our children should be the greatest fruit of our ministry. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway. Let's go to something lighter. This is going deep.
So, how do you deal with team members who are difficult? And, maybe they're just not showing up. They're not reliable. They're not learning their parts. Maybe they're not coming when they're said they're going to be there.
Yeah. Maybe
they just have what if they even have like maybe a bad attitude? Maybe they're the ones causing the negativity, discord, just difficult team members. Yeah. How do you handle that?
Well, it's always going to happen. So if you think you can avoid it, you're never going to avoid it. It's unavoidable. I like what my pastor used to say in Calgary. It always makes me laugh, and actually makes me, it just makes it easier for me to handle it and deal with it when it comes. He would always say, where 2 or 3 are gathered are imperfect people, And then I always think, I like to put myself in that category too, just, because it humbles me. Like, I'm one of those imperfect people, I've been that difficult person. I can be that difficult person, I can say even like just pragmatically is, we're in post-pandemic, and, we know Australia just went back on lockdown. I can hardly believe it. And there's a lot of feelings. There's a lot of emotions. More than ever. So like we already had difficult people before. And I think that we're really going to have to prepare ourselves. I don't want to say difficult, just for some challenges ahead with people, because people are going through a lot,
Yeah.
I think about 1 Corinthians 13, love suffers long and is kind. As worship pastors and worship leaders, it requires a lot of patience. It's going to require, maybe I'm saying this prophetically for some people, it's going to require a lot of long suffering, not just as leaders, but with the hearts of mothers and fathers, not to give up on our teams, not to give up on people, and not be so quick to just say, off with your head, you're out of here, because, we have to, I think that in this season in particular, the Lord's been talking to me about, hey, Jenni, you need to be quicker to listen and slower to speak, and realizing that, post-pandemic and through all these things, especially with this next generation, because I know a lot of people have a lot of the next generation on their team, is that they're going through a lot. They're dealing with a whole lot more than what we could imagine. And a lot of times they're just reacting out of stuff that they're already dealing with. And some of that stuff that they don't even understand fully what's going on, is that you almost have to help process that and realize a lot of them don't have a healthy home situation. They might not have parents that even know how to help them or know how to handle it. So, worship pastors, worship leaders, for me, I'm like a full-time mom. Every single day. I am literally a full-time mom to so many people, and that's just something that I've accepted. And I really believe that God is raising up not just leaders in this hour, but true mothers, true fathers, with the heart of the Father, with the heart of long suffering, with the heart of patience, with the heart of love, with the heart of understanding, with the heart of discernment too, so that we're not quick to judge that situation and that person in that moment, but that we could just, even before we go into that meeting with them or whatever, just pray and ask the Holy Spirit, like, Holy Spirit, would you just give me wisdom and understanding, discernment in all things right now, that I wouldn't just look with the eyes, of my flesh, but that I would look with the eyes of my spirit of what's going on, and how do we deal with this? So how do you deal with it? First of all, you got to deal with it. You need to deal with it. It's just be like a parent with poor behavior, like even with your daughter, like, you have to deal with it, because you love them. Not because in that moment, you can get frustrated with people, or you can even be mad at your team. You're not, I hope that we don't say, I'm mad at you. That'd be so immature, but we do get frustrated, and we try to hide it as best as we can,
Yep.
But we do have to deal with it, because that's what love does. And that's what love is, like Jesus, we can see Jesus, even modeling that, I think of Peter, Jesus with Peter before. I'm so challenged by this story, Matt, all the time, is before Peter was going to deny Jesus 3 times, what did he say to Peter? He grabbed Peter and he said, Peter, I'm praying for you that your faith wouldn't fail. He wasn't saying, Peter, you're going to do this, and Peter, you're going to do that, and ultimately this is going to put me on the cross and I'm going to suffer, and just for us to be just slower to see them and ask the Lord to show us, what's going on, So yes, we have to deal with it, because that's what love does. But let's not just be quick to just get frustrated and, perhaps some of us even angry, and you just want to like scream in a pillow. But just again, to go back to walking after the Spirit, is we need to deal with it after the Spirit. So it's going to require, in my life too, just even like I was saying, post-pandemic, I think we need to be prepared for some challenges, is even as leaders, like I'm talking about worship pastors right now, is that we're going to have to up the prayer in our own lives, so that our tanks aren't empty and our tanks aren't dry, so that we are ready and we're prepared to deal with this, to walk alongside people and to help them, as like Jesus would.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And it's seeing them as people and not just another cog in the wheel, and having the compassion and growing in that compassion. I love what you're saying there, because we've all had that moment, I'm sure, where you have this like epiphany where you're just like, maybe it's like maybe you watched some sort of like documentary and somebody just poured out their heart, or you heard like a testimony at church, or someone in small group shared what they were going through and they got really vulnerable, and maybe they don't usually, and every one of us have had that moment where you have this epiphany of, wow, people are going through a lot. Like we have no idea how much people are facing. And you don't know until you start asking and listening and giving people an opportunity to feel safe to share their story or what's happening. And I think that is kind of a part of being a leader, of maybe giving your team members a space to be like, how are you really doing? Like what's going on? Because I think if they're not showing up on time consistently, or maybe they have bad attitudes or something, there's something else deeper. And it's almost our responsibility as like the leader to like, how do we like love them in that and give them a safe space to be able to share that? And that might even just help, just them feeling known and heard. That alone might help.
And I think that's the first step to take, and then it's like, I'm not saying totally avoid, like, hey, you got to practice, you got to learn your music. Hey, we need to show up on time. But I have learned, I'm just thinking actually, as I'm sitting at this table in our staff room right now at the church, this was pre-pandemic, but I had a young man and he had a bit of an attitude issue. And I actually had to call him in here, and, I had to deal with it, just as what we're talking about. So I didn't let it slide. It was like, hey, we got to deal with it. But I looked at him, and I just said, I want you to know that I really care about you, and just like affirming him,
Yeah.
And by the end of that time together, we talked about all the things. He was crying. And, and not that tears mean anything, but his heart was open, and it was like something was broken in him, and a complete 180 shift. Complete.
Wow.
180,
Yeah.
So just the
Somebody
value
needed
in
to
seeing
care.
someone. Yeah. Because it was just, what really was behind all of it was behind the anger, and maybe behind the I don't want to say explosions, but just a bit volatile, at worship, was a spirit of rejection. Yeah. There was a root of a spirit of rejection, and the Lord began to show me that. And as we sat down at the table, and I just began to talk to him and, affirm him and talk about that, it just, something broke, and we prayed together, and that was the issue. If I just said, hey, I need you to quit being angry at practice. You just can't act like that. Well, that would have actually made him more upset, and it would have been another rejection in a way to him. But as you take the time and you ask the Lord, you say, hey, what is this? It was just like going layers deeper. It's like, oh, there's a spirit of rejection here. This is why this is happening, and it was beautiful. Yeah, I'll never forget it. Yeah.
That's so good. And it's that kind of pastoring and leadership that I feel like if we got a hold of that as worship leaders, it's going to take your worship leading and your worship ministry to a whole other level.
Yeah.
But it's not eeasy. Like it's challenging stuff.
It's not easy. And I don't want to say every case is like that, because we all,
Yeah.
I like what John Maxwell said the other day. He said, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. So I feel like I'm always learning, and, sometimes people just can't get their heart right. And you know what? That's not on us. We give them the opportunity, and we try and we do our best. But at the end of the day, we need to work together as a team, and people need to understand that, And, but, we do what we can to get there. And I'll stick with someone as long as possible, and until I know that there's nothing else that I can do. So the long
I
road.
think that's a good place to wrap this conversation up. I feel like
okay.
Those are such good words and good reminders and good challenging things for a worship leader to think about. Yeah. So I appreciate you, Jenni. Thanks so much for sharing your heart.
You too, Matt.
For doing what you're doing. It's huge. And I know that you just really genuinely care about the worship leader and the heart of the worship leader. So thanks for that.
Yeah. Love people. Appreciate you.
Yeah. Everybody go check out Worship Leaders Collective. How do they find it? What's the best starting point?
You know what? You can go to our website, worshipleaderscollective.com, or you can go to Facebook and just type in Worship Leaders Collective. You'll find us there. Or you can go to Instagram and just type in Worship Leaders Collective. So we're on all those three things. But if you jump over to our website, you'll find everything too. So.
Cool. Make sure you guys join that community. All right. Okay. See you, Jenni.
See ya.
All right, you guys, that is another episode of the Loop Live Show. So thankful for Jenni and her heart for worship leaders and for the community that she's built over there at Worship Leaders Collective. Make sure you guys join that, check that out. If you guys have any questions or any thoughts, in the comments, wherever you're watching this video, or if you're listening to a podcast, make sure you type in just a comment on what is one thing that you really walked away from this Loop Live Show with. What's one thing you really learned? What did you feel challenged by? Also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And on podcasts, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you can stay tuned for more Loop Live episodes coming to you. We've got a ton of great interviews lined up over the next couple months, and I'm looking forward to those. As always, thanks for being a part of Loop Community, and we'll see you soon. Hey, what's up, guys? This is Matt McCoy. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Hey, it means so much to us when you let us know what you thought. Write down in the comments what you learned from this episode, anything else that you found encouraging from this episode. Glad you guys are listening to the podcast. Hope to provide to you a lot of helpful content as you lead worship. See you soon.